Welcome back to another session of Your Two Cents. For today, we're going to be diving into the world of technology, the world of solar, the world of VC, the economy, some load shedding, and we're going to be talking to Vincent Maposa. He is a co-founder and the CEO of Wetility. I think at the basic level, I'm just going to say that they're a solar company, and he's going to give us a little bit more insight into what that actually means. I'm especially looking forward to this discussion because Vincent is someone that I actually know, and I've been following his business for some time. So it's always great, just to catch up and see what's going on. Vincent, greetings.
Thank you, Mio. Thank you for having me. I think since the last time we spoke, we're still a solar company.
But let's define what we mean by a solar company.
Yeah, so I think let's call ourselves a solar fintech, because a large part of what we do is that we make solar accessible through financial innovation. We're one of the few companies that offer a subscription service where a homeowner or small business owner can gain access to the benefits of lower cost electricity and uninterrupted electricity and pay a monthly fee as opposed to paying the full capex upfront, which might be quite exorbitant or unattainable for most customers. But how we do that is we take a look at just the quality of the products that we supply. It's tier 1 material. We have our own Wetility Pace, which is a hybrid battery energy system, where there's innovation around how it's reticulated, how it's tested, how it looks, how it feels. It's installed in your home. How you actually get onto our website or our platform, fill in your details. There's some innovation around that. I think we have the quickest acquisition time, or the time to acquiring a customer, where you enter your name, your surname, your residential address, your ID number, your pre-approved for credit. You get a decision on whether you qualify or not via multiple channels. Either your email, an SMS, or WhatsApp. You then make a decision on when to book an installation, etc. And that's all can be done in under 2 minutes in most cases.
Yeah.
And in the back end, there's quite a lot of automation that we have incorporated just to make that seamless. And post that, you get your own app, which is called WeX, which allows you to monitor the system. There's some element of gamification there. You get to see how much money you're saving on a daily basis. You can change certain parameters to drive, or increase the amount of saving, both financially and the amount of power that you actually consume. There are things there like load shifting, etc. So we are really trying to really address the matter, and the matter really is customer experience. So there are lots of solar companies, there are lots of power companies for that matter, and energy companies, but are they really looking at this as a customer experience problem? And are they tackling that and making sure that the customer gets what they want? They see the benefit tangibly, it hits their pocket, and they have a great experience. And is it upgradable, with apps and whatnot? There's lots of apps out there. Usability and the frequency of use of an app is actually quite critical.
Yeah.
So it's one thing to have an app and the system works, but you're not able to provide certain information or data or play it back to the consumer to enhance their decision making going forward. So that's really what we really try to focus on and do.
Oh, all right. That's actually very interesting, and I say that because at least now, we have a bit of an idea of what Wetility is, and some of the things that are that are driving, the business, and some of the components making up the business. Something that I've been curious to understand now, and maybe you can, I asked you this, before we started recording, and I'm pretty sure that, we're recording this on the 11th of July in 2024, which means it's been 105 or 106 days without load shedding.
Yeah.
Right. And I think many people thought that because there's no load shedding, perhaps businesses such as yourselves, might be facing an existential crisis, right? But, it seems that I've been mistaken. Tell us why that's so.
Yeah, I think it's about the value proposition.
Yeah.
I mean, our value proposition, I remember we spoke about this few years ago, I think, when we were at the Multi-Choice Accelerator event in Dubai, where I literally said our value proposition is cost saving first and uninterrupted power second. And the cost saving dynamic is one that evolves because it is still, I mean, electricity is still a regulated industry. And the moment the regulator agrees with either the municipality or the main power utility to raise tariffs, then the impact is felt. It's linear. The consumer feels it. And as that continues to be the case, because I mean it is a multi-year price determination, you don't need to look beyond just what the regulator is saying to actually see that the consumer is going to pay more and more for electricity, and is likely to do so for quite some time. And then there's certain transformational things that are happening in the market where there's further liberalization. So liberalization in most of these markets comes with two very particular things that are quite visible and have been observed in other markets. Is that initially there's price discovery, and usually when you're trying to discover prices for any good, prices go up. And then they eventually settle once there's economies of scale or there's further competition in that market. So I think South Africa is at that point, and the price of electricity is continuing to increase. You could throw in certain things such as, is our current system efficient? And by efficient, it has a lot to do with, obviously, is there enough generation capacity? Are we generating enough electricity? But are we also transmitting and distributing it efficiently? And some of that is downstream from Eskom, which is often blamed for the absence of power at the socket, whereas in certain cases it has very little to do with the generation of electricity. It has to do with derelict or old, inefficient transmission and distribution infrastructure that's stopping the power plant in Mpumalanga from delivering the kilowatt hours or the electrons to the appliance that you're trying to switch on. So because we were very deliberate about the narrative being cost saving first and then uninterrupted power being the second element to that, we were also educating consumers quite proactively and progressively in order for them to understand that having your own embedded generator within your own space, and the panels deliver the cheaper power, the battery stores some of that cheaper power to be dissipated later at night, leaves you with a lower weighted average cost of electricity than you would have if you were solely reliant on the grid. And in the event that the grid is down for whatever reason, whether it's uninterrupted, unplanned, interruption or a planned one, you're covered. And that's the critical element. Then another thing that we do, and we've started to do even a lot more, is bundling the product. So, when there was a rush, call it that, in the last 2 years, where everyone was installing whatever it is that they could install, very few companies.
Many people became solar experts in the last 2 years.
Exactly, right. And I'm fortunate to be surrounded by energy experts who look at it as just, energy and how do you make any environment energy efficient. So we have the Beast Bundle, right, in partnership with Tendai Beast and Tawarira. But what the bundle actually means is that we take a variety of products, we put them together, we lower the cost of the bundle. If you were to go and get a Plentify hotpot as an individual without the solar included in that bundle, you're unlikely to derive the maximum benefit from doing that. And we're quite deliberate about that. And we've even started doing certain things like adding certain energy efficient appliances into that bundle. Cooking is a very key element, or at least a consumer of power in the home. And using an air fryer is a lot more efficient sometimes than using your electric stove. It sounds very gimmicky when you think about it, but
no, listen, you're preaching to the converted. I am
exactly.
My wife introduced me to the air fryer a couple of years ago, and I've been a believer ever since.
Absolutely. So it's things like that, right? Where we're very conscious of what contributes to high consumption or higher than typical consumption within the home, within the small business, and start to look at how to drive energy efficiency. And in principle, we audit the home when we perform our site inspection. And beyond supplying you with panels, an inverter, batteries, looking at whether the home is compliant before we do that, and bringing the home to a certain level of compliance. we're actually trying to solve that problem, which is, cost first, and then the second bit is uninterrupted power. And then there's certain things as well from an access perspective and how we view the consumer. So there are certain consumers that have been excluded from, call it the solar revolution, and they have been excluded structurally, and also because a lot of assumptions are made about their capacity to actually embrace this. So a good example is, people with higher credit scores typically have lesser disposable income.
Okay, yeah.
And the reason for that is, they're the most marketed to, and there's an assumption that they are able to basically meet their obligations, which in principle is true, but you'll find an individual with a high credit score who at the end of the month, once you net off expenses against their income, have very little left.
Yeah.
Whereas an individual with a lower credit score who has been excluded from a variety of products actually has a lot more disposable cash, after accounting for those expenses that they can make use of in a variety of ways. And we've seen this with the telcos, right, where in the 90s it was quite, a lot of players in the space and a lot of credit experts were quite astounded that the prepaid market was generating, enough return, or at least from a cash flow perspective was at par with the postpaid market.
Postpaid base, yeah.
So you're asking, what's happening? These are the people that we don't expect to have that much income, but they're comfortable paying 100 Rand a day to make sure they have enough airtime and data. Back then it was airtime and SMSs. And they're comfortable doing that. And at the end of the month, they're paying 2x what you would pay for a standard contract. So then you start asking, but if they walk into any of the telco stores and, try to access that product, they will be excluded because of credit.
They won't do that.
Exactly. So we spend a lot of time looking at that and trying to understand how to make the product accessible without taking an unnecessary amount of risk or, extending ourselves, beyond what is reasonable. And interestingly, the reverse has actually happened. We have a strong book, right, where default is low. It's like literally quite low. By the strictest definition of what default is, even stricter than mortgage lenders and people in the credit card space. So we found that to be quite interesting, and just being sensitive to that and being at the core of understanding what the customer actually requires and how you can serve them.
If I'm understanding you correctly, what we are talking about and saying here is that the conversation around energy in South Africa, at the highest and broadest level, we've made a lot of noise about load shedding.
Yeah.
But underneath that surface, it sounds to me like you're saying South Africa, or at least the South African consumer, with the value of education, of course, has gotten to a stage where they are now looking at, okay, fine, load shedding is one thing, but I'm also grappling with generally higher electricity costs. Municipalities and ESCOM just put up tariffs, so efficiency is now, I guess, the name of the game, right? I actually never used to think about it that deeply until you mentioned Plentify, and I had a great conversation, with their team, with one of the co-founders, and talking about geysers. 40%. Apparently, that's 40% of a household's electricity
Typically
use.
40 to 60%.
It's just a geyser.
Just a geyser. And with the geyser, really, if you have solar, all you need to do is shift the load to a time when your cheapest source of power is readily available, and you can save an additional 20% minimum on your electricity bill. And so that's when I'm saying that we've bundled the product and we spend our time thinking about that. Like very simple things that are quite practical, deliver more results than the more complex things. And bundling that and bundling the thinking as well leads to a better outcome. So you're absolutely right. There's I think at surface level, the narrative around load shedding was the prevalent one, and it made a lot of sense at the time. But the underlying issue really is cost. And more so at this particular time where consumers are really, really constrained.
Yes.
Like interest rates are high, disposable income is like minimal. The cost of living, is high, but also quite fragile. And any shock in the system leads to an adverse outcome for the consumer, right?
Yeah,
For example,
yeah.
we're chatting about the exchange rate before this, right? A shift one way or the other has an impact on just the cost of a variety of things, because we're a net importer of some of the things that we a few years ago were not net importers of, but
True.
because of how the global economic environment has shifted, we're now that. So the fact that we have as little default as we currently have in our book at a time when consumers are quite constrained points to the fact that our ability to give them an extra 300, 400 rands is quite important to them. I wouldn't say it outweighs whether the power is interrupted or uninterrupted, but that ability to do that means that we have a bit of staying power in a market where we're continuing to grow, and there are reports of decline in terms of just activity.
So my question then becomes, maybe to put a bow around this particular point, is what does a Wetility customer look like in 2024?
Yeah.
Taking into consideration what you said about certain members of the society who would have been traditionally excluded from accessing certain types of finance. The fact that now we're looking at efficiency, the fact that you guys have an lease element, to your product. It's not everyone that can fork out 150,000 rand for a solar system. So, what is the profile of a Wetility customer looking like?
I think any smartphone user who has a home and is reliant on being connected for them to be productive is a Wetility customer. And you're looking at a customer who values certain things. A good analogy is a customer who, regardless of their economic fortunes or misfortunes, will have a television, watch DSTV, wants to stay informed, has a smartphone, reads the news, uses that to earn income, to travel, to get on a Bolt, and views their home as an area of importance, not just from this is where I happen to rest every night, but it's the center of my existence. People with families who, have children or have partners who are reliant on being digital animals, if I'm allowed to call them that. I recently spent time with some guys in the fiber space who said that their biggest customer, children, they're the ones who drive the decision on uptime and connectivity. So it's Coco Melon and all these other things.
Because if the connection time's out,
then you have a problem.
Exactly.
So that's the customer. The customer who's wants to remain connected, who cares about how much it costs to remain connected, is our customer. And that's, you're looking at lower middle income to upper middle income and beyond that. Those are our customers. But there are certain things that we're doing very deliberately to start looking at what has typically been referred to as lower income households, which we genuinely believe are, it's a temporary view on the economic fortunes of those households. Recent stats suggest that the township economy, as it's commonly called, has been growing at above 10% per annum over the last decade or something. And that consumer has aspirations. They want to change their circumstances and are doing it quite rapidly. And because they're doing that, we are viewing that consumer as a consumer that we want to help. That's our customer. That's the customer we're saying, let's walk with you along this journey where your children now learn using tablets. You need to stay connected. Sometimes you work from home. It's a hybrid environment. The cost of doing that is quite important to you, and let's support you through that journey. So that's the Wetility customer. It's not an affluent very, wealthy customer. It's a customer who's discerning, who wants to understand how to lower the cost of electricity in that home and basically lower the total cost of ownership of a home. That's the customer we're looking at.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it is very interesting just to see, I guess, in real time, the evolution of, I guess, the conversation around energy and, what's driving decision making in the home.
Yeah.
It's very telling of the times that we're in. I like what you said just now to say that the cost of living, I think you said, is delicate. I think that's the word that you used. Yeah, and yeah, I felt that for some reason. I was like, yeah, that's deep. But maybe what we can do is to take a step back a little bit. I initially met you. You mentioned it just now.
Yeah.
I initially met Vincent in Dubai.
Yeah.
He was part of a multi-choice accelerator program. They were there to be exposed to different investors, pitch business, that type of thing. And I'll be honest, right? One of the reasons why what stood out to me was later on, because it was only after the trip that we understood, who was able to raise, all of that stuff. And I think Wetility was the company that got the most investor attention, at, that part. I'm just going to call it a roadshow.
Yeah.
That particular roadshow. So I was like, okay, cool. That's an interesting one. Before we talk about the funding journey, because that's always a big thing with, with startups, it's for people that are uninitiated with utility. What was usually, as a business person, you're either solving your own pain point, or you've just identified that there's a gap in the market.
Yeah.
Right? Who saw the gap? When was this gap seen?
Yeah.
And how did you? Because you're a co-founder, right? You have a couple of guys that you're working with. Where did they come in?
Yeah. So it's interesting because yes, it is an environment where I initially spent a lot of time in the energy space and my entire career. Right? I worked as a management consultant, as a strategist, and during that time, I traveled extensively. And given my background, having grown up in Zimbabwe, in Bulawayo, which was the second largest city then, which was a functioning economy. The 90s were great if you're a Zimbabwean. Uninterrupted power, water, you go to school, you get a pint of milk. Everything made sense, right?
Yeah.
Then. But what started off as, periodic or occasional interruptions when it came to provision of power became a system-wide issue where you have a generation issue, the grid is not energized, people steal cables, the cost of replacing that becomes an issue. Then you go from a couple of hours to, a couple of days without power. And realizing as well that those systems or those sectors never fully recover. So when I used to work at Deloitte and Cummins, I used to travel extensively across Africa and the Middle East. And I used to ask, questions of my colleagues and people I would meet in the market. At what point did this turn into a generator market? Right? And they said, no.
Yeah, like Nigeria.
We had access to power from the grid. And I'm like, when? And they said, look, 20 years ago, we probably had a functioning grid. And then I would ask questions like, okay, so what will it take in future for us to improve the performance of the grid? And what was stark and was quite common in terms of the responses that I got was, it will take too much. And while that's happening, we will just continue to burn diesel until someone comes with a solution. So when you start looking at just the fundamentals of a monopolistic power utility that's heavily reliant on aging infrastructure, and where that was going for say Eskom or whatever other monopolistic power utility in the region, you can already see the signs that it's people are looking at alternatives and taking gigawatts away from the grid. They're making a plan. So, the utility is heavily burdened with a variety of things: operational inefficiency, debt, etc. So the only lever that it can pull in order to remain sustainable is price. Quantity is now a questionable thing. So having spent quite a bit of time just understanding those markets, and both as a consultant who was looking at the system and advising a variety of ministers, power sector, CEOs, regulators on how to perhaps think about things differently, and also working in an entity that just made sure power was delivered, and the fuel was diesel, and which was the most efficient at that time. It sparked an idea in me to say, look, the consumer that's likely to be least attended to is the homeowner, but this is the consumer that probably pays the most per kilowatt hour for electricity. And the home is becoming more energy intensive. People are going to require more and more power, or at least if it's not more kilowatt hours, they're going to require more uptime.
Okay.
Across a variety of different things that they want uptime for. Back in the day, it was your geyser, your stove, TV, end of story. Now it's like all that and more, right? Your computer, this, that, your cell phones, 5 cell phones in the home, 7 iPads, washing machine, this, that, and whatnot. So then it became quite clear. So I had a lot of conversations with a lot of people because I was surrounded by people in the sector. So one of my friends, Christian, used to work at Eskom. We worked together at Cummins. We spent a lot of time having chats about this. Most of my colleagues were just energy sector people. So I think the idea formed over time, but the decision to actually, leave formal employment, I remember recently I spent some time with my former manager, and some of the more senior people I eventually reported into are doing amazing things now in their careers. And she reminded me, she said, the day after you started, you told me that this was your last job. Right? And I was very clear, right, that this is my last job, and let's see how it goes. I want to go and do something of my own in the future. So, but at some point during, and I had a great career at Cummins. I was enjoying the work. I was meeting a lot of interesting people. The work was engaging and it was fulfilling. But I woke up one morning and I decided that now's the time to tackle the problem. And this was, around about 2018, when you could see where all of this was headed towards, and deep understanding of that. And I spoke to Sandeep, who was a close friend of mine, a former management consultant, when we were both at Deloitte. We worked on a very interesting regulatory project that informed our understanding of pricing, and said, hey, do you want us to band together and start doing this? And before that, I spent a lot of time with my brother as well, who's also a strategist and a management consultant, just workshopping the idea and trying to use his understanding of my context to communicate it a lot better than I ever could. Because my brother, is an intersection between brand and strategy. So he was able to take some of my ideas and communicate them visually and verbally in a manner that landed. So by the time I was engaging with Sandeep, Chifiwa worked with at Cummins, and Ikena, who eventually joined, there was a bit of clarity around what it is we were trying to do. I think we've had a conversation before about why not C&I. I said C&I we felt was overserved at the time. We felt like residential and light commercial, or SMMEs, was just underserved. So 2019, I then decided that it's time for me to started out on my own, as in practically. I spent more time on my own, and my co-founders still had other things that they were doing. And
so they were still working?
Still working.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, and I was alone. I previously started a business which was a small, because I was very passionate about sneakers at some point. I still am to a large extent.
You and me both.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Where are your sneakers today? I'm wondering.
You find me on a more formal day.
I found you on a more formal day. And that business did well, but there was a point where we had to make a decision to, be full-time. And that was one lesson I learned, which is, if you're going to start something that's like of significance and is real, you have to be full-time at it. and some people have a different experience, which is you can actually moonlight and do other things, and it can also be quite successful. There are lots of success stories of people that did it that way. But I was very deliberate about that, and I spent time raising capital from friends and family, literally, and we raised enough. I put my life savings and savings that didn't even belong to me. Literally, I put other people's life savings into the business. And because I was very passionate about it, knowledgeable enough, and quite driven and very deliberate, they trusted me with their money, and they thought I had a good chance of making a success of it. And I'm still quite grateful, and will always be grateful for some of the support I received early on. And none of these investors has left our cap table. They're still part of our cap, and quite happy now that we're in a position where it's not as murky as it typically is when you start a business, and they can start to see where everything is going and what's happening, and it makes more sense.
So let's talk about that. The fact that that funding journey. You've been in the consulting world, which I think is fascinating. Because I think there's just something in the water with consultants. I'm convinced that is the way to sort of gain a fundamental understanding of an industry, of a sector, before you venture into your own. That's my belief. So it's fascinating to me just the fact that you're a management consultant and you have all these people around you. That's fascinating to me. The fact that you identify the problem, you see commonality across different countries, and you're like, I'm gonna develop a solution around it. You raise money from the 3 Fs: friends, families. Sometimes people call the fools. The fools as well.
I'm glad to have been the only fool, and the friends and family remain friends and family, because some people thought it was foolish endeavor, but
it's worked out.
It's worked out to a very large extent.
How much have we raised now? And I don't know how much detail we can get into, but let's start with how much have you raised now, and in how many rounds?
Yeah, so I think the sum total is about R1 billion, 900, depends on the exchange rate, because some of it is denominated in US dollars. So about
I like how you casually say R1 billion. I'm just saying.
No. So, and how our funding works is it's raised, it's committed. You draw as you go, so we don't have any gaps for quite some time. Raising that capital was not easy, because I like to say this: capital is shy, and why I say it's shy is it's present. You can try to woo it. Sometimes it plays a little dance with you, and just it chooses not to participate when you think it's time. And then when you think it's not time, or whatever it is, then it comes, and there's like a flood of it and that. But one of the things we tried to do was be very deliberate about who we're going to raise the capital from.
Okay, cool.
Because that's very, very important. And most founders and co-founders think it has to do with control. And I think the people on the other end who are providing that capital often get very nervous when founders and co-founders, want to hold on to control for the sake of control. But as you said, when you asked me the question, what are we? We are a solar fintech. So a lot of what we're doing has a tech element to it, and tech sometimes requires deeper investment than is usually assumed upfront. Yes, there is.
The cash burns can be high.
There is an asset cost, so there's some tangible assets there, because it is a subscription service. But on the other end, for you to deliver that service the way we're delivering it today, you have to invest quite a bit there. So why we were deliberate is we looked at a wide number of potential investors, and chose the ones that we thought would be sensitive to us as human beings, firstly, and secondly, quite perceptive about what we were trying to build, and would intervene with capital and other intangibles in order to make that a reality. So, we raised from the Multi-Choice Enterprise Development Trust, call it concessionary loan, right, interest-free, with a variety of conditions that made it easy for us to actually accelerate our growth. We've raised from venture debt providers like Sanlam, Jaltec is one of our funders and very sensitive to what we're trying to achieve because they understand our sector.
Yeah.
And then when we raised, equity, we raised it from a private equity fund. And it's not often that as a Series A company or a company raising Series A or your round between seed and Series A, you approach a private equity company and are quite successful at doing that. So we found a good partner in Metier who was provided the capital. But even how that's structured is also quite important, where we understand that delivering success for ourselves means we first delivered success for customers.
Yes.
And how we draw on that capital is there's quite a very clear relationship between delivering success for our customers and being able to access that capital. And we continue to engage with as many capital providers as possible, because part of it as well, as I said, is about total cost of ownership of the home and lowering the cost for the consumer. That's why bundling the product is important, and finding the most affordable sources of capital for ourselves means that the end result for the consumer is an affordable product, one that they can pay for because it's valuable, they understand the value, but we should not be overcharging customers because we're trying to maximize profit unnecessarily.
Yeah.
The value comes from being able to deliver the service and deliver it well, and it's accretive. The value will flow to us as it should.
Two things before we finish off for today. The first one, just touching on what you're saying now about, I guess, the funding journey and the type of funding that you have in place, right? People are often, when you talk to founders, people are often preoccupied in certain circles about raising funding.
Yeah.
Right? And understandably so. Certain things are capital intensive.
Yeah.
Right? For your business model to work, you need to outlay a lot of money.
Yeah.
Right? You have to put in solar sets into people's homes, and also some of the other products that you spoke about just now, the hot pot, etc. There's an upfront cost that you're taking on, and that you sort of are clawing back over time through, I guess, the subscription business and all of that, right? And that makes sense. But what should a founder be focusing on? Because you said capital is shy, right? If someone has the ability to bootstrap, should they bootstrap? If someone can bootstrap but they have access to capital, should they just take it? Like, in the environment that we're in, because obviously we're talking to young people, right? And some people don't go for something because they look at the funding requirement and they think this is too large, it's just never going to happen. So I guess it's just your thoughts around the funding discussion, and especially now as someone who's experienced in raising funding versus when you were I guess plowing your own savings into this thing at the beginning. Maybe you could just talk to us. How can young people that are also trying to maybe solve big issues approach the funding discussion?
Yeah, I think funding has a lot to do with understanding your product and where you are, like, from a timing perspective. So, there's a time where you have to bootstrap. There's a time where you have to raise seed capital. There's a time where you have to raise grants. There's a time where you have to raise Series A. If you're in a capital-intensive industry, it's inevitable that you're going to raise capital. But you don't just get there, overnight and raise the capital that's required. So there's a period where you have to raise smaller tickets or use whatever resources you have to get to that point.
Yeah.
Product market fit, commonly used, but what it meant for us was, sure, there are panels out there, there are inverters out there, there are batteries out there. The product was actually, can people subscribe? And can a lot of them actually do that? So all we had to prove was that one individual is comfortable with this whole idea of subscribing.
Okay.
And that one individual went and told their friends, and their friends subscribed from us. And that didn't require the amount of capital that we are, outlaying on a daily basis now. That was, small amount of money. relative to what we understood the market potential was. And that was, cash we had generated from, as I said, from, capital we had raised from friends, family, and whatnot.
Yeah.
And we did that, and that's all we did, right? We just deployed that capital and proved that, look, this is a concept that works. 6 months in, the customer's still paying us, we're servicing the customer. Then we said, for us to succeed, we need to raise even more capital. And we need to prove that 10 can become 100. And we had to go and raise enough capital to deploy 100 systems. And we did exactly that. But the most nervous period for any founder who's serious about their business is it's not raising the capital. It's once you have it. Because once
now the pressure's on.
Now the pressure's on. So my approach, and myself, Ikena, Chifiwa, Sandeep, at every juncture is we raise the capital, then we look at our business and we fix what needs to be fixed about our business, and we smoothen the path to deploying the capital. Then while we're doing that, we start thinking about the next fundraise. But we're deep in operations, so it's almost like you surface once in a while, as I'm doing right now, to talk about capital and other things. But, I spend 80% of my time now that we have a bit of capital just focused on the team, focused on the customer, and how we make sure that the customer, or at least we deliver on our promise, on our brand promise. And that's essentially what you need to do. But be conscious of the fact that, and which is what I'm, not uniquely, but very specifically conscious of, is that as the capital starts to run out because you have done well, you're going to need to raise more, because where you're going is just going to require significantly more capital. And we're very conscious of that. And sometimes we raise slightly more than is required at that point in time, and exceed expectations of the investors that have given us what they have given us, so that in the next round we are well set up to continue to do that. So as I said, we are deep in operations, understanding the tech, looking at the system now, because when you have a couple thousand customers, it's different. You're now thinking about the return that comes from having that many customers and the scale. You start thinking about things like virtual trades of power, the ability to trade power, wheeling excess power. You start thinking about even broader, or bigger markets, or value-added services, or adjacent markets where you can also plug in. You start looking at your technology as a product, where if we can do this in the solar space, we can do this in many places.
Where else can you do it? Yeah.
And then you start looking at your data and saying, this is the amount of data we're generating, and is this valuable, and what can we do with it in terms of deepening our understanding of the customer, or making more and more products available. So that's what we do. And that's between fundraisers, or between raising. But once you have it, you have to deploy it, and you have to do it as efficiently as possible. And start thinking about the next fundraise, and you do that well. And it's like a project. Fundraising is like a project. You're very specific about, at this point, this is where I need to be, this is where I need to be speaking to. This is what we need to do. And when the term sheet comes, or when you sign the subscription agreement, and your new equity partner receives their shareholder certificate, it's validation of all the work you have done before getting to that point. It's not just all of a sudden someone sends you something and you sign, and you have a couple million in the bank. It's like you have really worked towards it, and it's a project, and it has timing, and it has resources.
All right. One of the things that I like the most about the way that you're talking, I'm reminded, people always use this quote. I attribute it to Uncle Ben in Spider-Man. Is with great power comes with great responsibility. That a lot of the time, one of the things that I don't think founders sometimes appreciate, at least before they raise funding, is that once you raise the funding, you've become a custodian of capital, right? You don't raise funding for the sake of raising funding. You also don't raise funding for, obviously you're there to grow the money. But the money isn't flowing from their pockets into yours. There must be value creation, along the way. And I think that's where, sometimes the wheels sometimes really fall off,
Yeah.
in a big way. So really great to hear, I guess, how even your own mindset has, I guess, shifted over the years,
Yeah.
from worrying about where to find the funding as to, okay, now that we have the funds, how do we deploy them as efficiently as possible and create the most value, along the way. Where I want to end today's conversation, I could talk to Vincent for a long time, but it's once again coming back to young people.
Yeah.
Is we're at an interesting point. We're seated in South Africa right now, just come out of an election. There's a government of national unity. Lots of people wondering to themselves, what is the future of the country, of the continent, of the global economy, all of that. But for me, it's not necessarily that per se, but rather it's an age question,
Yeah.
right? And I say an age question because, at least in the South African context, one of the things that has been interesting about the government of national unity is that there's been a little bit of young blood that has been injected into the government,
Yeah.
right? So for me, it's for someone who's trying to who's trying to found a business,
Yeah.
and especially one that's trying to address a big issue. You have a lot of attitudes and prevailing opinions out there. I don't want to work for the man. I just want to go do something for myself. Some people, straight from school, they're trying to start something, whereas others take, your approach.
Yeah.
You go out into the industry, you see what's going on, realize where the value can be created, and then do that. I had a conversation with someone recently who said that it seems right now, at least with the people that are raising decent amounts of funds in South Africa, you're looking at founders that are in their 40s, right? Somewhere there. What's a good age, or good stage rather, for a young person to actually quit their job
Yeah.
and go headfirst into
Yeah.
a business?
Yeah, look, I had a 10-year career,
Mm.
corporate career, before I started the business. So I was 32 years old, just before I turned 33. And my take, and this is my experience, and it's anecdotal, so it's not the benchmark, but I was better for it because I spent some time with very accomplished people who taught me everything they could teach me at that point. And I also, was observing certain things. As a consultant, as you said, one of the great fortunes is being at the table, because you serve C-suite individuals and you figure out how they think about things. So naturally, you develop a bit of big picture thinking, but you're also not that accomplished when you're at that table. You're still the guy who goes and works very, very hard, right, in the background, and comes back the next day and knows probably a lot more about a very specific matter than the people at the table. So that helped. It was critical. It was fundamental for me to have spent that time as a management consultant, as a strategist in a Fortune 500 company, where you meet people that have accomplished great things, and because they are not under any pressure, are willing to teach, and are invested in your career and invested in your growth. So that was quite critical and quite important. It's also sector specific. I was getting into infrastructure, right? Yes, it is solar fintech, but the solar part is hardware, and hardware is hard, right? If there's, the hard thing about hard things is that hardware is hard. It's like, that's one of the things that you just need to be comfortable with. And a younger me might have underestimated what it actually means to be a hardware company with a software overlay in a difficult market. And by difficult market, what I mean is, the key thing that's going to drive or drives economic growth in South Africa is infrastructure. Is going to drive just infrastructure development and further investment in making infrastructure available so it can help to turn the wheels of the economy, like practically, like more rail, more power, more whatnot, because that's what's going to drive that. And the most valuable companies in South Africa typically have a tech or platform overlay on an underlying infrastructure product. And for you to understand infrastructure, you need to invest a bit more time. But that's not to say that with all that's happening, with AI and more in we're chatting about biotech and other areas, there's no path for a young founder fresh out of university to just, go and tackle a real problem and come up with real solutions and build a business around that. But the ecosystem, if you're young and you're ambitious and you're pursuing something, right, has to be, you have to build that ecosystem or be a part of it.
Yeah.
I think when I was at the Forbes 30 under 30 thing, I spoke about the importance of incubation and accelerators, but being selective, right? Because I've met brilliant entrepreneurs who are in this incubator loop. It's a never-ending loop, right? They're like,
I'll be honest. I'm not the biggest fan of that specific ecosystem, especially when it's abused.
When it's abused,
it has value.
Yeah,
but I do think it can be abused.
And it's abused by both parties. There are people that are in that loop forever and ever, and there are people that fund that, and their benefit has little to do with it is misalignment. Let's call it that. And I'm not saying that we should just avoid incubators, avoid accelerators. Just be very, very selective. I mean, we chose the multi-choice accelerator, we chose the climate finance accelerator, and we were part of those and we participated fully. And that ecosystem has a lot of great people who genuinely, at the very core of who they are, want to support entrepreneurs and want them to achieve great success. And it's not just mediocre success or you happen to have made it. It's like, we want you to achieve greatness and we want you to do amazing things, and we're willing to support. So I think if you're a young founder who's, as you said, probably not in their 30s, who doesn't have a bit of a long corporate career, you need to look at your ecosystem. You need to surround yourself with the right people. Also starting, I wouldn't advise, some people do it and they do it quite successfully. Find co-founders. That's step number one before. Find co-founders and communicate the ideas. Have robust debate. Disagree with people, agree with people. Use a lot of data and intelligence to determine if this is a real thing. And once you do that, make sure that the ecosystem is robust. So, because entrepreneurship is almost like idols, right? It's almost like,
I like that.
Sometimes when I watch idols, when I watch some of these shows, I ask questions like, so this person's friends and family,
they allowed this to happen.
They allowed this to happen. And a person goes and obviously, there's shock and entertainment value. So it's not like the producers don't know what's happening, right? They also plant individuals that do that. But think about it. You're auditioning and you're saying, this is what I think I can deliver. And the people around you will either say, makes sense, doesn't make sense. Have you tried this? Have you thought about this? But when the time comes, regardless of how old you are, how accomplished you are, the decision is yours, and it's you and your co-founders. And you make that decision, and once you've made that decision, you have to live with it, and you have to execute. And I also have a lot of respect for people that start something, fail, and go and do something else.
Okay. Yeah.
Or ones that retract and say,
this is not for me.
This is not for me. I tried. It didn't work out. Let me go back and find a corporate job and whatnot. And corporates have also created opportunities for entrepreneurial people to remain within the corporates and exercise their right to be entrepreneurial and have a bit of flair in what they do. And some have succeeded quite well. I think Naspers is one that, if you think about Foundry and what it actually was and what it led to, there's a lot of that happening as well. But I think as a founder, it's really co-founders, the ecosystem and timing, and just knowing that if the idea makes sense, do I have enough arsenal? And that will lead you. So as a founder who's now in his late 30s, I'm happy I took the leap at that time.
Okay.
In my 20s, I have strong reason to believe I might not have been as prepared as I was in my 30s.
Yeah, no, I'm there with you. If there's one thing I always, at least where I am now,
Yeah.
and I tried the whole thing of doing business before I started working and all that stuff. And um, obviously, everyone has a value of hindsight, but there's a lot of people that think that they are above being in a corporate, or they think it's going to be so sucking, and when am I going to get to my own thing? And I honestly think that if you go and you participate properly in a corporate environment, and especially if that corporate environment is aligned, I guess there's the ecosystem you're talking about, aligned to what it is that you're trying to do, there's so many lessons. Because a lot of corporate, especially the ones that work well, have figured out very efficient ways of doing some of these things, and it can help you to leapfrog. So many places where you typically go and bump your own head, you just learn how others are already doing it, and then you take it from there. So I really do. I've even spoken to people in the creative sector, to say that some of the issues I see in the creative sector, I'm like, for lack of a better word, you can see that there's a lack of corporate structure that is killing certain individuals, and the level of professionalism that would have been beaten into you in a corporate environment. And there's a level of structure around what you're doing that you would have learned in such a space. So I'm an advocate. Obviously, like you said, some people are able to figure it out. Mark Zuckerberg and all those types of people.
And I envy those people.
Great.
And I marvel at their journeys and how they did that. And sometimes it's just not your reality, and you need to accept that.
Exactly. So that's where we end off for today. It has been a really great discussion, just talking to Vincent, about the solar business, which is Wetility. And I like the way that we went about the discussion, just talking about the bigger picture issues that are happening in South Africa, where we are right now. The fact that, at least in the current environment, load shedding has subsided somewhat as an immediate issue. But now, the likes of Wetility have found, the fact that, there's other drivers, for revenue growth, for customer acquisition, all of that. Also, just talking about, some of the issues around, starting the business, the funding journey, the conviction, to quit one's job, the lessons, the ecosystem, surrounding yourselves with the right group of people. Also, at the same time, getting an understanding of where he sits, in the debate around age. When is a good time, to be starting a business. Very shrewd words that came from him around, having the right ecosystem in place, going out and surrounding yourself with, great people. Timing is something that he spoke about quite a bit. And then I think the other thing that, did, stick out to me is the fact that, your background, where you come from, all of that stuff, it does play, a huge role in where you end up, down the line. So that's been it. We're on conversation. Vincent Maposa, he is a co-founder, and he is the CEO of Wetility. Vincent, thank you so much for being.
Thank you so much, Mliwa. I always enjoy these chats, and I look forward to the next one.
Yes,
because I know there will be a next one.
Yes, definitely.
Right. Perfect. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.